Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. There's a certain romance surrounding dorm room startups, I guess. From Microsoft to Dell to Facebook, there's something about the audacity of building a company before you even get your degree that sort of catches the imagination. We've already explored a couple of .com dorm room startups on this podcast. The Globe especially springs to mind, but the title for the first .com dorm room startup probably goes to Tripod, which was founded all the way back in 1992 by Bo Peabody and several of his classmates. In this episode, Bo recounts how Tripod stumbled upon one of the earliest antecedents for what today we would call social media, and gives us an amazing analysis about what it really takes to succeed as an entrepreneur. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Bo Peabody. Bo Peabody, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Thank you.
We usually kind of start out with, your sort of tech background and things like that, but I see that you actually went to college for a poli-sci degree. So I'm curious, did you have any interest in computers, awareness of the web and the internet around the time you were in college?
Well, the internet was certainly around when I was in college. The web, as we know it as a graphical medium, wasn't really developed until 1993, 94, which was my sort of junior, senior year. But I was lucky enough. My mom worked at a software company when I was growing up, so we had a computer in our house really from as early as certainly middle school. From middle school, we had a computer, and it was a rudimentary sort of DOS, IBM thing. But we played games on it and did word processing on it, and so I had an awareness of computers. And really the thing that I think was the main observation that I made when I got to Williams in 1991 was that I walked into my dorm and I noticed that in every single person's room there was a computer, or a computer that maybe they were sharing with a roommate. But for 30 kids or for 40 kids in one sort of dorm section, there was one TV. And it was clear that the way that people were communicating and entertaining themselves and doing, spending their screen time, as it were, was on a computer and not on a television. And I think that was a generational shift.
Actual personal computing, the classic definition.
Yeah, like that was how people, that's where they went first instead of to a television, and that definitely struck me. But then it occurred to me that all the things that were on that computer were sort of more work related, but for games, and that it felt to me like there had to be a better way to sort of get people engaged in that device beyond, word processing or simple, computer games.
So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe if it's 1991, your freshman year, I believe this is when the idea of what would become Tripod came to you. So tell me a little bit about this, how this idea evolved.
Yeah, so it was really came from the fact that we felt that we could. I don't know. I mean, the very, very first initial kernel of the idea was that there were all these things that students needed to plan for their futures, which we at Williams and at any four-year college, you're being constantly sort of either encouraged or pressured to do, that could be delivered more efficiently on a computer. That was sort of the initial notion. It wasn't even really when we came up with the idea of delivering it in a networked environment was almost secondary, because the only network environments that were graphical at that point were AOL, CompuServe, and Prodigy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So those were closed systems. So we had this notion that we might go do a deal with them, but no college kids were on those things because they were too expensive. So it was just a notion of, can we deliver information to students on a computer? And that was the original idea.
And the idea is specifically to target college students as your audience.
Yeah, and that was sort of, it was like the first generation of people who were using computers sort of as their primary means of entertainment and work. And so that was the idea. And then the real, that would have been an uninteresting business. And so the aha moment came in, and we incorporated in 1992 with that idea that we were going to build this, better version of AOL, this like cooler, hipper version of AOL. And in fact, our first business plan called for a $10 million capital raise, which, by the way, back in 1992,
right.
That just wasn't happening unless you were running an equipment company. So the notion that we were going to go raise $10 million, but that was the idea. We were going to raise $10 million and put modem racks in all these different cities and build this X25 network and compete with AOL, CompuServe, and Prodigy. That was our original business plan. And the probably like the first moment of hyper capital efficiency, which is an age that we're now 20 years into, with networked software and networked entertainment, was that when the browser was developed and all of a sudden you could put onto the internet something that you could make look like it was AOL, in that very moment, our business plan went from $10 million to $300,000. Because all of a sudden, we didn't have to provide the proprietary network and software that would allow someone to experience a graphical interface in a networked environment.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You keep saying we. Who are you developing this idea with?
So originally, I developed it with a friend of mine, a fellow student named Brett Hershey. And we then spent probably 3 or 4 months talking about the idea, and then we brought it to a mutual professor of ours, a guy named Dick Sabat. And the three of us started Tripod. That's one of the reasons why we called it Tripod. It was just three people, and we were very convinced that the sort of the notion of 3 people or 3 legs of a stool are stronger than 2, and that was how we came up with the name, which wasn't a very good name, but we had no idea what we were doing, so we just called it Tripod.
Actually, I was going to say, Dick Sabat, I believe, was an economics professor, but none of you really have any entrepreneurial experience at this point.
No, I had been an entrepreneur growing up. I had, lawn mowing businesses and driveway snow blowing businesses. I lived in New Hampshire. I had a driveway seal coating business. I was, a kid entrepreneur. But no, none of us had any real experience in starting a business. Where do
you raise money from right at the very beginning? Is it just friends and family and savings and things like that?
Yeah, that has not changed a lot. We originally approached Peter Wilmot, who was on the board of trustees of Williams and had been the chief financial officer at Federal Express. And the reason that we approached him is because the idea for Federal Express came out of a paper that was written at Yale by a student. And so we thought that Pete would have a disposition, a predisposition to take us seriously, because he had obviously made a lot of money following an idea that had been germinated in an educational environment. So, and sure enough, he did take us seriously, and he gave us our first, I don't know, $10 or $15,000, which we used. I guess maybe he gave us $25,000, which we used to do this big market research project to really understand whether there was enough interest in the student community, to warrant this type of service. And then we raised another, I don't know, $100,000, maybe. It's probably less, probably $75,000 on top of that, to build believe it or not, we built a CD-ROM sort of version of what we wanted. Like we imagined it in a networked environment, but it was so hard. We couldn't show it to anybody in any way. So
sort of as a prototype.
We built a prototype that you could click through, almost like what the prototyping things that people use today for mobile apps like Envision. It was basically just allowed you to click through a series of screens and see what it would feel like.
So you also don't have any experience, I'm assuming, with programming. So how do you start to put this product together?
So the interesting thing about the web and the internet, sort of pre the web, was that you didn't really benefit from knowing the existing computer code languages. Like you didn't. It was such a completely different environment that it was really more about understanding, almost from a philosophical standpoint, like how people would interact with each other in a networked environment where everybody in the world could sort of talk to each other and share things with each other. So, and the reason that I was interested in media was that I was doing media studies as part of my curriculum at Williams. And so the reason that I knew about the internet is because many of my classes required us to use the internet and to read about the internet as a social cultural phenomenon. And I think that was actually the people who were doing some of the more interesting thinking back then about it were approaching it from that perspective. In fact, the person that we hired to be our first chief technology officer, had a rule that he would not hire any programmers who had computer science degrees, because he felt that they had too much baggage to think about the problems that we were trying to solve, which actually HTML, which was all we had for the first really 3 or 4 years, was an incredibly simple code, but thinking about how to deploy it in ways that would be useful to humans was the harder problem. Anybody could learn HTML. Anybody can learn it today.
Right.
I mean, it is the simplest of languages. Now, of course, you're dealing with that front end being, that is the only thing that does is display the information. Back then, displaying the information was all there was. There wasn't.
Yeah, because conversely, I always love to ask this question, even though I know what the answer is going to be. But there's no such thing as CMSs or anything like that back then. You guys you're everything you're doing, you're hard coding into pages, and you're putting the servers together yourself and the databases together yourself, right?
Exactly. Every single thing we built from scratch. We built our chat system from scratch. We built our messaging and commenting system from scratch. And that was really where Tripod took off, was that, one day, Ethan Zuckerman, the chief technology officer, came to me and said, "Hey, Nate Kurz and Jeff Vanderkloot, last night built this thing that allows you to put text and pictures and sound onto, into a form, and you push a button and it automatically becomes a web page." And
actually,
that was, genesis.
Can you put a pin in that? Because I want to. Well, first of all, let me ask you this: when Tripod launches in '95, on the web, does it already have the homepage builder as a part of it?
No.
Okay, all right. So then, yes, put a pin in that because we'll come back to it chronologically. So when you launched in 95, to the benefit of those of us that now can't find something like this on a Wayback Machine because it doesn't go back that far, but if I came to Tripod, what would I see? Describe the product, the service offerings, that sort of thing.
You would have seen a collection of for the time, beautifully designed web pages with a bunch of text and pictures and minimal ability to input a question or a comment or have a chat with, two other people that might be, it was the interactivity was so minimal. So you were really just being able to call up these pages of information that we had hard-coded and designed and do it in a real-time environment.
And again, it's targeting students about things like, I guess, job advice, personal finance, health, that sort of thing?
Yep. It was all basically, what we thought of it as like a hipper version of AOL. So we had travel and careers and, lifestyle. It was like a magazine. It was a magazine that was delivered via the web.
What was the uptake? When
it was horrible.
Okay.
The reason it was. I think about it now. Back then, it was good because I always joke, and it's not really a joke, that when we launched Tripod, you could literally surf the whole web.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like you could go to every web page that existed. Not every web page, but certainly every front door that existed. There were thousands, not billions of web pages. So, we got people to come visit us because we were the only, one of the only games in town.
Well, and also, there's no promotional infrastructure except for maybe getting noticed by Yahoo and becoming a cool site on Yahoo at this point, right?
That was pretty much the only way. In fact, there's a funny story that we decided, because we had raised a little capital, we decided to buy some ads on Yahoo. And so we went to Yahoo and we said, look, we've got, $5,000 and we want to buy an ad on the homepage of Yahoo. And so they said, okay, show us your ad. And we said, well, here are our ads. They said, these are the most beautiful ads we've seen. We're going to run it for this price. And it was like, back then it was a time, like you would pay for a month. There was no sense of traffic or CPM or anything. And so they ran it for a month. And then they said, we got a lot of traffic. And we said, would you do it for another month? And they said yes. And so we paid them another $5,000. And then that was up. And they said, do you want to keep going? And we said, we don't, it's working, but we don't really have a revenue model. So, we're not going to spend any more money. And they said, you know what? We love your ad so much. We're just going to keep it up.
That's nice. Yeah.
Because we think it's the most beautiful ad we have. And then if you look in the Yahoo S1 filing for their IPO, Tripod is listed as one of their top 20 global advertisers, and we only ever spent $10,000 with them.
That's a good story. Okay, so let's come back to this tool that's developed to create homepages, personal homepages on Tripod. So how long into after launching does this get developed?
I want to say I should know the exact answer to that, but I want to say it was less than 6 months. Mm-hmm. Less than 6 months. Because I think we were all, the developers were sort of banging there. Like we did have a little funny church and state thing where we had an editorial team and we had a development team. And the editorial team viewed it, I think rightfully so, as an editorial product. And the development team viewed it as a technology product. And they wanted to constantly be integrating interactivity. And I think their instincts ended up being right, which was, this is an interactive medium. That's what separates it from every other medium. We should have interactivity. So they started building things like we had a trip advisor where you'd put in I use that term. I actually think we called it that. Where like you'd put in the dates that you were going to travel, and it would remind you to do this. And then we had a little thing called the reminder minder in the lifestyle section, where you put in all the dates of the things that were your birthdays, your mom's birthday, your parents' anniversary, and it would remind you on that day via email that you had. It was like the stuff that is like hard coded into iOS. Now we were like had these little interactive tools that we put onto the site, and that was the development team saying, this is what makes the medium different. The fact that we can get people to input their information and we can respond to it through a database, that's what's interesting. And so there was this constant, healthy, creative tension between those two groups that I was in the middle of and trying to manage. And the thing that really took the business it made the business successful was when they built that homepage builder. It was the first thing that we put up that got traction. And all those other little things, the reminder minder and the travel advisor and all these things, like they were cool, but nobody ever, like they didn't really gain traction. But I'll never forget, when we put that homepage builder up, it went up, the guys put it up in the middle of the night. They didn't even ask, they just put it up. I came in the morning, and Ethan Zuckerman came and told me, like, they put this thing up, and I said, fine, no problem, great. And then by noon, our servers were burning. It was unbelievable. I'll never forget watching the ticker, because they had set up a ticker to see how many members we were getting, and it was like we were getting one every 10 seconds, then one every 8 seconds, then one every 6 seconds, then it was like down to one a second. And it was like, this is all in the first week.
Well, you stumble upon, it's common, we think of now, that you can build an entire business like Facebook off of user-generated content. But at the time, people were still very much trying to do things like Pathfinder and other things that were, we're delivering media, but in a new way. And this is the first time where it's like, all right, just let our community create the media, and we're just the platform for it.
Yes, exactly. And the truth is, you couldn't create a business doing that, and we never did create a business. We ran Tripod until 2000. I mean, 2 of those years we ran it inside of Lycos, but it was never a business. I mean, social media as a business, it was never a business until Facebook. I mean, it was. GeoCities never made a profit. We never made a profit. No, but none of those early, Tumblr still doesn't make a profit. I mean, none of the early social media businesses made any money. They barely made any revenue.
Well, you had to have experimented with various revenue models. Did you try advertising at all, or subscriptions?
Oh, sure. We sold some advertising. It's funny, we at one point we allowed members to pay to not have ads on their page. And I think we were generating like $10,000 a month from people who were paying us to not put ads on their page. I think when we sold the business, we had $50,000 a month of revenue, and we were burning $350,000 a month of cash.
And how would you describe what the kind of home pages that users were developing? Again, just for the benefit of people that weren't there at the time, like, is it like, the social media that, like, is it just like, this is Jim's homepage, or this is Jim's Cincinnati Reds page, or like, what were users doing with it?
What I find amazing about Facebook in particular is that the pages are not, they're ugly, right? I mean, your Facebook page is not a pretty page. If you want to build a pretty page, you use, some other system. You use a real, something like WordPress or Squarespace or something that's meant to build something beautiful. That we thought that was social media, that you would build something that other people would come and look at it, and they would interact with you about the thing that you had built. That was sort of where we were with social media back in really up until 2005, right? And then when ICQ, I mean, the instant messaging platforms were really the first thing where people were like, okay, just communicating with each other is the medium. That's the social media. It's the things you say. It's not something that you beautify and editorialize. It's just like what's happening in your life and what picture you took and what funny joke you know, and so that it's not. That's why Facebook doesn't need to be pretty, because it's not about being pretty. It's about just being able to communicate your life quickly to a lot of other people who are interested in it.
And so you're saying that even all the way back then, people were doing similar things with tripod pages?
They were doing what you see now on Tumblr or on WordPress.
Okay.
What people were doing on tripod, just much less beautiful versions of it. Although every so often we would have someone who would do something gorgeous because they knew what they were doing. But it was really rudimentary, graphic design and illustrations, and it was very much an 80-20 rule where we had, it's probably more of a 90-10 rule. 10% of the pages generated 90% of the traffic.
So you've stressed that you weren't really generating any revenue from this, but at the same time, by 1997, I think you passed 1 million registered users, which doesn't sound like much, but if there's only 25 million people on the web at this point, that's pretty amazing. And you're like, the eighth most trafficked site on the web. So you guys really do gain traction just by stumbling upon this phenomenon.
Yeah, and I think the stumbling upon it was lucky. The harnessing it and riding it and treating the community with care and cultivating the community and curating the community was the thing that we did that I'm proud of. And building the homepage builder was a bit of a stroke of luck, and I give Jeff and Nate a lot of credit for really doing that, and Ethan for giving them the creative space to do that. I don't take any credit for it. Everything that happened after that, we all take credit for, because we did a very good job, I think. And in fact, we lost a tremendous amount of money by making one really big philosophical community decision that our competitors did not make, or they made the opposite, which is that we did not allow ourselves to be colonized by pornographers.
Mm.
And that was a decision that I am still very proud of, and will ever be proud. It cost us hundreds of millions of dollars. And GeoCities took a different approach, which is that they just let, just the same thing Tumblr did, which is just let pornographers, colonize the community, and they had 10 times as much traffic as we did.
So in, I believe, December of 1997, though, given this, traffic success, Lycos comes calling. Can you tell me the story about getting acquired by Lycos and why you decided to do that?
Well, the first person who came calling was AOL. And we originally had signed an agreement to sell the company to AOL. So we originally got some interest from AOL. We then hired a banker, a guy named Chris Pascoe, who was at Morgan Stanley at the time, was now at Blackstone, remains a close friend. And Chris went out and did what good investment bankers do, and he told our story to everyone who we thought would be interested. And at the end of the process, we had 5 offers, and we decided to take AOL. They were all similarly priced, the offers. We had offers from AOL, Yahoo, Lycos, Excite, and Microsoft. And they were all similarly priced. Lycos and AOL were the highest prices within a pretty tight band. And we decided to go with AOL because they had given us assurance that we could keep the company where it was located, which was in Williamstown, Massachusetts, which was an odd place to have a company, but it was grown there for obvious reasons. And about 30 days into the diligence process, after we had signed an agreement to sell the company to them, they basically told us that that wasn't what they wanted, and that they wanted us to move the business down to Virginia. And we said that's not what we signed up for, and we knew we had 4 other offers that we thought we could rekindle, and so we went in literally it all happened sort of over this Christmas break of that 1997. We went back to Lycos and said, hey, if you guys are still interested, because Lycos also was willing to allow us to stay in Williamstown, and it was easier for them because they were only 2 hours away. They said absolutely, and we literally negotiated the agreement over about a 27 hours straight, leading up to the day before New Year's Eve, December 30th, which is when we signed the agreement.
So that's December '97, and I think the deal was in like the $50 to $60 million range. But just 12 to 18 months later, places like GeoCities get taken out for billions. So was it just a little too soon? Poor timing and being earlier and anything with that deal?
I think so. I mean, what I always say is there were three companies that really mattered in the space. There was GeoCities, there was Tripod, and there was the Globe. And I think we took the middle road, and we took the safe road. And I think if we had not sold, we would have either been GeoCities or the Globe. And GeoCities obviously was an extraordinary outcome financially, much better than ours, and the Globe was a zero.
Right. Initially successful, but eventually a zero, yes.
Yeah. And so, I think, we could have, we took a safe path. And a lot of that had to do with my age and experience, and also with Dick he always instituted in me the sacred trust, is what he would call it, when you take capital from other people. And he said, we have an opportunity to give everybody a fantastic return, and we can continue to hold our Lycos stock if we want. So everybody has the option to continue to ride this wave, but we have the ability to offer people the chance to take 3, 4, 5 times their money out now, and it is our fiduciary responsibility to take that. And that was something that it's very old-fashioned, and I think not old-fashioned in its intention, but certainly in the world of venture capital now, people would say they want you to shoot for the moon, and they don't want you to take the safe road, and they don't care about getting 5x their money. They want 100x their money, and I'm in that world, so I know. But it was a sign of who we were and a sign of the times, and we felt that was the right thing for us and for our employees and for our investors, and that's what we did.
If you'll indulge me, because the only other Lycos person we've spoken to is Bob Davis so far. I believe you spent about 2 years at Lycos. Could you just tell me whatever you want to tell me about Lycos as a company, maybe the culture, how you guys were treated within Lycos, anything you want to say about Lycos?
So I always say that, at Tripod I learned how to turn a 5-page paper that I had originally written, about Tripod into a product. And at Lycos, I learned how to turn a product into a company. And I really learned more about what it really means to have a sales and marketing orientation at Lycos than I ever learned at Tripod. And really probably the steepest learning curve on that front that I've ever had, even to this day, was working with Bob and Ted Phillip and Dave Peterson in particular, and the board there, watching growing that company with them. It was like we were treated extraordinarily well. We were the first acquisition. We were a bit of the crown jewel. I think Bob has been incredibly gracious in giving us, maybe more credit even than we deserve for for helping them develop the network strategy and getting to, at one point, be the biggest web property in the world. I think Lycos as a culture was, you either really liked it or you didn't, because it was a very sales-oriented culture. Bob was one of the most successful salespeople at Wang. Dave Peterson was a remarkable sales executive. And if selling ads and doing deals wasn't your thing, then you weren't gonna do well at Lycos. But if it was your thing, it was an incredible place to learn and an incredible place to be at that time.
I believe you had a 2-year lockup period where you couldn't sell your Lycos shares, and so that ends around Christmas of 1999, and I believe you sell immediately as soon as the lockup period comes.
Yeah, we had a lockup that sort of was a gradual unlock. So I sold pretty much all the way from the beginning until the end.
But you're selling at the absolute highs.
Yeah, it was very lucky. I mean, I sold all of my shares before the crash.
We'll come back to luck towards the end here, but I want to ask you about. I've read that you've described that one of your roles was sort of to sell yourself to the media to promote Tripod, yourself as a newfangled kind of CEO entrepreneur. You wrote that you created this image of the slacker CEO, an athletic, shaggy-haired, perpetually mellow 24-year-old making millions while barely lifting a finger. I've asked this of the Globe guys, how they sort of became poster kids for the .com bubble, but even I've asked the original Netscape engineering team about how the media took this image of how a startup works and how they were college kids that worked through the night and slept under their desks and kind of ran with it, and that's what we think of today. So tell me what you think now, actually, yes, 20 years on, about that image of the startup that you were a part of bringing into our culture.
Yeah, I think it's I guess there's a thing that I really feel proud of, and there's a thing that I think is unfortunate about the way that the media has always portrayed startups. And the thing that I'm proud of is that we all, I think, for the first time, made the word entrepreneur and the lifestyle of being an entrepreneur and the career choice of being an entrepreneur something that is very mainstream. And that the connotation of that word is not, someone who can't get a job, at P&G or Goldman Sachs. It's someone who is, confident and bold and risk-taking and innovative. And I think that's a very good thing for our culture. And I think that the first wave of internet entrepreneurs, which I feel lucky to have been a part of, wasn't the only thing that sort of popularized that notion and changed that perception, but I think it was the most important group of people that did that. The downside is that I think it all just seems so easy. The media makes it seem easy. And I played into that because that's what they wanted to believe, that I sort of did all these things, without really breaking a sweat. And, this culture of immediate success, and it all happened so quickly, and now you go from nothing to having a beautiful home and millions of dollars. And that's not true. And I believe that there are many people who go down the path of being an entrepreneur because of that image that's created, when they really don't know what they're getting themselves into, and they really haven't done the hard work to figure out if it's the type of lifestyle and the type of career choice that's right for them. They've been sort of lured into it, in the way that Hollywood has been doing that forever, right? I mean, making this incredibly glamorous image of people who act for a living, when the truth is, it's very difficult. And a lot of people go into that profession because it seems glamorous and it seems easy and like a great lifestyle, but it's incredibly difficult and incredibly time consuming. And you end up giving up huge portions of the rest of your life in order to be good at it.
In a similar vein, you wrote a book the title being Lucky or Smart, The Secrets to an Entrepreneurial Life. And I think that this is something that does not get as much emphasis as it should. So say something about the role that luck actually really plays in really any entrepreneurial endeavor.
So it plays a huge role, and some people call it timing, and some people call it, being in the right place, and some people call it knowing the right people, and there's a lot of versions of it, but there's a serendipity that needs to happen in a startup in order for it to be successful. And the thing that I think that I tried to explain in that book that I think people miss is that it isn't in order to make lucky things happen, you have to make a lot of things happen. Because if you do 1,000 things, then you have a chance that one of them is going to be the thing that is in the right place at the right time, or ends up getting you in front of the right person, or whatever version of luck it ends up being manifesting itself. If you do 100 things, you have a much worse chance of one of those things happening. So the hard work is in doing all of these things, 999 of them, which are going to be total waste of time. And one of them is going to be the thing that allows you to propel the business to the next level. I think that that's sort of where the luck, and then I think there are little versions of that happen along the way, but there's that initial thing that really allows you to get the traction. And then I think it's the posture that you take on the business after that, where you either realize that part of it was luck, and that now you're a steward of that luck, and you've got to manage it and cultivate it and curate it, or you convince yourself that it wasn't luck, and that it was just your brilliance, and that brings a lot of ego to the table, where I think you start to make bad decisions as you ride the wave that you're on from that original spark.
So I believe you've spent the last 15 years or so in and out of venture capital. But I also, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you recently returned to entrepreneuring. Is that right?
Yeah, I did about a year ago.
And first of all, why? But then tell us about Renzel.
Well, the why is I originally went into venture capital because I was so tired. After the crash, I had started 4 companies between 1998 and 2000 in 2004, and the crash of sort of 2002, 2003 was just a brutal time, and I was managing 4 different businesses, each of which had its own CEO, but I was chairman, and I was managing all the investors, and I had a CEO who had a nervous breakdown, and another one who couldn't take it and left, and another. I mean, it was really, really complicated time, and after that, I just decided that I needed a break. And the truth is, venture capital is a hard job, but it isn't as hard as being an entrepreneur. And really, it's because you don't have a lot of people reporting to you. And that's what makes running a company difficult, is the personal personality aspects and the managing of people. And in venture capital, you don't have that. Some of that, but not nearly as much. And so, for me, venture capital was a place where I could recharge my batteries. Take some of what I knew about starting companies, both the good and the bad, and do a little coaching rather than playing, was how I thought about it. And then after Village Ventures ended, after about 10 years, I was at a crossroads, and Graycroft was extraordinary in sort of giving me a place to work out what I wanted to do next. And I sort of was there for 6 to 12 months while I decided whether I wanted to join them, as a full-time partner, or continue as a venture partner and go on back on the other side of the table. And it took me actually, I decided quickly, mostly because I had to, that I wasn't going to become a full partner. But then it took me another 2 years to really get to the point where I was ready to start a new company. And so that new company is Renzel. And part of this is in the book, but I've for the last 20 years I've been the co-owner of a restaurant group.
Right.
And so I've had these sort of two little parallel lives where I've done this sort of hardcore technology, media, venture capital life, and then I've been an owner of restaurants, which is a very analog business. And I've always wanted to figure out a way to marry them. And Renzel is bringing sort of a modern data science and sort of technology approach to producing restaurant ratings, and also to using the data giving the data that we use to create those ratings back to the restaurants in order to give them the ability to improve their guest experience. So it's a data and media company that covers, at first, the high-end part of the restaurant market by creating this panel of people who collect data in these restaurants in an anonymous fashion. And then we built, some data science that allows us to look at that data in a way that is far more sophisticated and far more objective, than any of the other rating services have ever looked at data.
Well, Bo Peabody, thank you so much for remembering all that for us, remembering basically the birth of user-generated content, on the internet and things like that. But thanks for telling us your whole story.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm more tired after telling that story than I thought I would be. It was an amazing time.
If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. There's plenty more great internet history where that came from. And if you're a longtime listener, then you know what to do to help us out. Rate and review us on iTunes. Because iTunes gives credit to reviews and ratings, and the more great reviews we get, the more people will discover us. As always, there's more info on our website, www.internethistorypodcast.com. The show's Twitter handle is @NetHistoryPod, and my personal Twitter is @BrianMCC. Thanks for listening.